Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second virtual event in a series around diversity and inclusion, organized by the Council for Business with Britain and sponsored by LSEG, a leading financial market infrastructure and data provider. At LSEG, diversity and inclusion is critical to their success. LSEG believes that diversity makes us more dynamic, fosters innovation, and boosts performance. Colleagues are recruited and encouraged to develop their careers regardless of age, gender, nationality, culture, or personal characteristics. LSEG is proud to be a leading proponent of diversity and inclusion in Sri Lanka. In the first session, organized by the Council for Business with Britain, participants were witness to an enlightening conversation between Lord Davies, the Prime Minister's trade envoy for Sri Lanka, and Bani Chandrasena, who will join us again today as moderator. Some of the key takeaways from this conversation were around the value of diversity for success and continuation of any business in the foreseeable future, and the requirement for true leadership to achieve it. Today, we hope to hear more from the Sri Lankan leaders who've taken a leading role in this conversation. So let me introduce these people to you. In alphabetical order, our first panelist, Arjuna Nanayakkara, is the head of Shared Services Center, LSEG Sri Lanka, and is responsible for managing, building, and extending the capabilities of global service offerings to LSEG out of Sri Lanka. He is a management accountant by profession, a marketeer, and qualified in computer science, design, and engineering. Our next panelist today, Bingumal Thewarathanthri, better known as Bingu, was appointed Chief Executive Officer of Standard Chartered Bank, Sri Lanka, on January 1st, 2019. He is the first Sri Lankan national to be appointed to this position. Apart from his role as CEO, Bingu also heads Sri Lanka's commercial, corporate, and institutional banking business. Sarinda Unamboowe is the CEO of MAS Kreeda and a member of MAS Apparel Board. He is a committed conservationist and a champion of environmental sustainability and sits on MAS's Sustainability Steering Committee. He is a committed change agent and has been one of the driving forces behind the Work from Anywhere initiatives at MAS, and a strong advocate of flexible work policies and empowering women in leadership roles. Our moderator, Bani Chandrasena, will be joining us again today. She is a true diversity and inclusion specialist and vice president of Diversity Collective Lanka. At Diversity Collective Lanka, inclusion is when they see women, people with disability, and diversity of ethnicities contributing to our workplaces, as well as in leadership towards the growth of a business. This collective brought together a group of like-minded individuals from the corporate sector, realizing the conversation and action around diversity, inclusion, and equity that was much needed in Sri Lanka. Bani is the vice president of the board and drives the corporate pillar, focused on changing the mindsets towards inclusion and openness, advocating for the better representation in the workplaces. Her work is also about encouraging leaders towards more inclusive behavior, which is imperative for the retention of the diversity and the future success of companies in Sri Lanka. Now, before we get started, if during the discussion you have any questions, please type them in the chat box, addressing the host and the co-host, or in the comments section of the Facebook Live. There will be time at the end of the discussion to address some of the questions. I will now hand over to Bani and hope you will all enjoy an insightful conversation on this important topic. Bani, over to you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you all for joining this conversation on diversity and inclusion. We believe it's a pivotal conversation for the future success of all businesses. I want to refer to Lord Davies a little bit at the beginning just to set the context, because I think some of the things that we heard from him, I think becomes really relevant when we start the conversation with these three gentlemen here today. Just to recap, Lord Davies, who was a catalyst for the UK getting women on boards to 25% in the short span of 5 years, highlighted a few points that I'd like to mention here. We need bold frontrunners who will create this trend towards a change of behaving more inclusively. We believe it starts with companies like the companies we have today, Standard Chartered, MAS Holdings, and LSEG, and allies in leadership like who we are going to be speaking to today. Lord Davis also shared his personal story of leadership and how humility and his willingness to leave what he had learned in the past of leadership at the door to be able to make this transition into the new kind of leaders that we require. We also discussed the business value diversity and inclusion brings to a company and the urgency of the change needed here in Sri Lanka. So I'd like to dive into talking to Sarinda, Bingu, and Arjuna today. And if I may start with some of the quotes that we have heard from all of you to try and understand you as a person, as well as how your leadership style has evolved around this topic. If I may, Sarinda, start with you. We heard from you saying that you have found that equitable mix of women in leadership has made a huge difference in your teams. It's also up to us as leaders to support them and create the opportunity for them to reach their full potential. If you could, Sarinda, talk a little bit more about why that statement and how you have seen that kind of come to life in your journey.
Thanks, Bani. I've had actually two contrasting opportunities to really compare those that statement in. One is setting up an organization, and for those on this call, Bani was the head of HR of that organization, and she and I were probably the first 5 employees. And we made a conscious decision that the senior leadership team, as well as the leaders that we were selecting, were going to have 50-50 representation. And we did that, including the senior most teams of the ExCos, everything like that. There was 50-50 representation. And I feel that added a huge amount of value. It gave the organization a lot of character. And it also helped us really attract some exceptional female talent into the organization as we started building bigger and better going forward. Coming forward a few years, I've taken over an organization now that the leadership ratio was 12% diverse, 12% female. And that has been quite challenging, because that means that even when you try to recruit, what invariably happens is that that balance still continues to stay off kilter. And that has been a challenge all the way. Even bringing people in at middle management level or even at junior level, it doesn't set a good example of the diversity that we are looking for. So I think it's really important that when we are setting organizations up, or even when we take over organizations or create organizations, it's important that we set ourselves some ambitious targets and then bring that diversity in as early as possible, because you lose so much. I think the statistics are out there for everybody to see of companies, how they perform when they have diverse boards or diverse leadership teams. So I won't go into those numbers, but even economies have done better in organizations, in countries where organizations have a better balance.
Thank you, Sarinda. We're going to dive into that a little bit later once we get a little bit more conversation around Bingu and Arjuna also. If I may go to you, Arjuna, you talk about leaders nurturing diversity and inclusion as a strategic initiative and making that part of the DNA of the organization. Can you tell us a little bit more about that aspect for yourself personally as well as at LSEG?
Absolutely, Bani. So if you look at that as an overall statement, it is a very leadership statement that I'm making here, because leaders need to influence companies and get a lot of clutter out of the way and create a lot of positive energy to get a change done. And there is a bit of transformational leadership that you need if you want to move an organization from state A to state B. But where the beauty comes in this statement is diversity and inclusion. And if you narrow it down to gender, it is a very evolving topic around the world. And countries have transformed. I've been in countries where gender mix is 0, like in the Middle East, worked there. I've seen the middle path of this, and I've come to companies like LSEG, where it is something that we breathe as air inside the system. So if you really look at what a leader needs to do, it's not that easy. You're going to get into a bit of controversy here and there when you want to get this done. And but you need to fuel this as a need, because leaders need to see 5-10 years ahead of what we are managing today. And they need to understand the patterns and how the social system changes over a period of time in the globe. It's not the 1970s, 60s anymore, and we need to make our organizations ready for the next century. That's how organizations have remained for 300, 400 years. So if you look at a company like LSEG, where I'm glad to see that we have got a lot of foundation in and we are talking about this topic, but there are a lot of listeners out there. They're trying to get this done and initiate it. So a message from a leader is, it's your job, whether it's one of the most easiest thing to do, or it could be the most complex thing. You got to get it done. You need to influence the system. You need to get inner circles, set up systems, create that environment where it becomes a DNA in the way you work, and include diversity and inclusion into your system so that everybody benefits and it becomes a natural system which creates and unleashes talent in an organization.
Thanks, Arjuna. Bingu, if I may come to you, your statement actually goes into purpose and valued behavior, which I think, if I take your quote, our purpose and valued behavior demonstrates our belief that a successful business thrives in diverse and inclusive societies. Bingu, if you could share a little bit about a better understanding of what you mean there, and also how you have seen that evolve in Standard Chartered Bank.
Thanks, Bani. So we have 86,000 employees in the organization and about 125 nationalities, and we speak 176 languages. So diversity is a way of life for us in an organization like that. I've been in Asia, Africa, and in the Middle East for the last 150 years. So we've seen some of the challenges in our footprint markets long time ago, before some of the other companies, because the diversification we had geographically. So if you look at our purpose, I mean, again, this purpose of built up like about three years ago, driving commerce and prosperity using our unique diversity. So diversity comes in as a core part of the purpose, and you can clearly see diversity is a critical part of driving the purpose. And as a purpose-led organization, we believe that diversity and inclusion has to be a part of our DNA. So that's the purpose side. But if you look at the values, like the valued behaviors of Standard Chartered, again, it goes on like this. So it starts with never settle. So we don't settle for less. So our women in management, in our boards, I mean, our targets we've met in Sri Lanka with 36%. Then we have another valued behavior called do the right thing. So in terms of supporting women-led business, we have taken a stand in terms of lifting participation and contributing more to the women-led businesses, and also adults and girls in our communities through our goal program. So doing a lot in that aspect as well. And the last valued behavior is better together. I mean, it says it all. So I mean, in a diverse organization, driving diversity for the last 10, 15 years, we've only seen good results, and we'll only get better and better at it. And specifically Sri Lanka, we've achieved 50-50, I'm sure you know, in terms of gender diversity in Sri Lanka last year.
Thank you. Yes, and I think the banking sector is one of the sectors that is kind of spearheading that whole gender diversity, which I'm excited about. Sarinda, if I may dive into a little bit more about the different experiences that you've had, well, within MAS, but I think outside MAS as well. I mean, you spoke about what the value you see and what you have seen as value that comes to the table. But can you also talk about some of the challenges and difficulties that you have faced when trying to bring this gender diversity in? Because I think realistically, I think the audience as well as leaders listening need to understand it's not easy. What are some of the things to expect as challenges, and how have you tackled it?
So I'm not going to talk about, I think somebody has their mic on. Sorry, I'm not going to talk about the experience of setting a company up from scratch, because that one was pretty straightforward. We made a plan, we made a decision, and we executed to that. So that was fairly straightforward. The difficulty that anybody faces when they come into an organization that has 10%, 12%, 30%, gender balance at leadership is that when you're even when you go into recruit, you put out an advertisement for recruitment, invariably you'll find that the balance of female to male CVs that come in are hugely tilted in favor of men. And then when you have a highly male dominant workforce or leadership team in your organization, the bias there would also be to recruit men. So it's kind of a terrible catch-22 here. But what's really important is that we realize that out there right now, we have come from a very inherited hierarchical male dominant society. And even the businesses haven't really evolved to stay with the current times. It's still very hierarchical and very male dominant. If you look at most of the organizations in our country, it's all male dominant. Male dominant boards, male dominant leadership teams. So if we are to make this change, we have to make some very bold changes. And although this is not a popular way of doing it, I am a firm believer that an organization has to bring in a quota system. Because if we don't bring in a quota system, we're always going to be running against the tide here, swimming against the tide here. Because you are never going to be able to, sometimes you may have your first choice may be a female candidate, but invariably, you will never be able to bring your numbers up to where we belong in a short period of time. So while many of the organizations that have this tilt, now if you take the apparel sector, it's very, we can make a bold statement and say 90% of our workforce are female. Yes, maybe so, but that's on the factory floor. If you take the leadership team, it's probably 15 to 20%. MAS, I believe, is at 21% or 22% in leadership. So there's still a huge way for us to go. If you're talking about going to 50%, that is such a massive jump from where we are right now that we'll never be able to make it unless we drive some stakes in the ground and say, this is what we're going to hit. So it's at the moment, most organizations make these very fluffy statements and say we are going to achieve gender parity at a particular point in time. It's pie in the sky stuff unless you set yourself some targets and start hitting those targets. So the only way that you measure leadership to hit those targets and to actually achieve those targets is either put some extremely strict KPIs and say you have to hit them, or put a quota system in and say you have to achieve this quota by such and such a day, which means you might have to even shuffle your teams around a little bit within the group or wherever. And the group is constantly growing. So there are opportunities of moving people into different roles and filling these people with strong female leaders from outside. Now, the example I always draw when people say quota system is unfair is look at the South African rugby team. They won 3 World Cups. They have won 3 World Cups in the last 20 years. And in those 20 years, those 3 World Cup winning teams had quotas. So you start off with small quotas, but you build up. If you look at the South African team now, it's fairly well represented with multiple, colors, creeds, and whatever. But the point I'm trying to get at is it can become painful. It can become a difficult decision for people to take. But if you're serious about this, you have to make that commitment.
Thanks, Sarinda. So I think the takeaway for me is it has to be an intentional decision and not just by the wayside to actually try and bring diversity in because of the history.
By the wayside is not going to happen.
Yeah. And we have to think of the history and the culture that we, the culture, etc. all
Absolutely.
play a part.
And all of us. Sorry, if I may just add one more thing. All of us on this call, everybody comes with conscious and unconscious bias. And many of us carry this unconscious bias of what a female's role in the workplace is. And that is damaging. So there's a lot that needs to be done to educate the leadership as well as set these targets.
Thank you. So that segues well into what I wanted to, sorry, you're on mute, Sarinda. Sarinda, you're on mute.
Yes, I thought I was done.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were talking to us. Apologies. Okay, sorry. So this segues really well into what I wanted to talk to Arjuna about with regards to people managers and leadership and KPIs, which is something that LSEG is taking very seriously, with not just with KPIs, but also the kind of training that they give their people managers. Arjuna, can you tell us a little bit more about how LSEG is making that change, bringing it into the culture itself?
Yes, Bani. Yeah, it's a nice segue, I thought. First of all, people manager is a evolving concept, because it's not really head of a department or you are authorized to run a team. A people manager is, you got people under you. It could be through structure or through governance or some temporary arrangement, but you are managing a set of people and you're responsible for them. So defining the people managers and the responsibilities and art in an organization. And this concept is evolving more and more in the world. When you are a people manager, you will have to look at diversity and inclusion as a topic, and especially gender being one of the main topics under that. So one of the problems that you see when you get this topic going is, first of all, honestly, I'm saying I did not understand this fully from my great beginnings. You need to understand what diversity and inclusion and gender balance and gender mix is, and why it is so important to your role. If organizations try to preach this as a syllabus, saying A, this is what gender mix is, B, this is what you need to do, it doesn't become part of their work, is it? Because you've got a day's job and you're responsible for it, and you get assessed for your performance based on those deliveries. So now on top of that, you're talking about gender mix in organization and trying to hit some numbers, which is not really your forte. So this is a behavioral change we are talking about. In a way, I'm being a bit cruel here. You're trying to learn and unlearn in a bit of a rehabilitation process, where you're getting our people to look at the world in a different way. Over a period of time, you're not going to get this overnight. So we looked at many ways of doing this. And I remember, I'm not being very shy here, because some of these leaders and participants in this call, they'll go through this, right? I remember on a call, not on a call, this is one of the last EXCO meetings that we had, where we had the luxury of meeting together. We had a vote on diversity and inclusion. Some of the leaders mentioned that this is not for me. I don't understand this. This is a taboo still in Sri Lanka. So I cannot really go and endorse this. So in an organization, when the leadership is trying to endorse it and push it down the layers, how do you actually tool your people managers to understand this topic and act on ground? This is what that means, how you give training to these people. So you got to figure out a very long-term training program where they end up getting KPIs. You're right. I mean, that's the subject. Whether it's a quota system or a KPI system, they should know why it is so important to them. And knowing that the organizations are changing, and especially the knowledge organizations, you need to convince people to do things. You can't just give them an order. So if you're a people leader and you've got a very stretched team under you, that manager should be convinced, getting women into the team, whether it's going to give them more pressure or not, and how they can work around it. If they get pregnant, how do you work around that situation and make it a positive than a negative, right? How do you give maternity leave? How do you give a women-friendly environment and make them feel comfortable in an organization so that women feel belonged when they work? So all that is actually part of giving awareness around this topic. But we didn't stop there. I mean, I remember we had a very nice drama. That's something that piqued my attention, right? We did all this training, guidelines, everything, but still we realized employees were struggling to grip this in their day-to-day life. So how do you get it across through a subconscious training and a communication program? Employees got together. I was so impressed, right? They did the choreography they were, mimicking a house environment where the wife is working and the husband is expecting the wife to cook and all that, babysit. So, and how you get women appreciated in a work culture and embrace it with more attention to detail. And then you later give them the long-term benefits, because if you really look at it, if you get that diverse organization under you, it improves creativity. We all know that. But how do you convince and see it as results? It actually gives you a different opinion. You might get a balanced view out of your divisional or a team outcome, because there is so much of vibrant feedback coming. Some of it is allowing your employees to speak freely and allowing that jelly environment in your organization. So getting that training done where managers feel that they can add value to this system and make it broader, so that there is appreciation to create your teams to be more diverse, is what we are talking about here as a training. And in that, picking few sensitive spots, understanding that people are different, accepting them as they are, and trying to get the best out of that. I again say, unleashing their talent with the way they are, and making that gradual transition is what it is, Bani. And it's a fantastic journey. I mean, if you start somewhere, you can get somewhere.
Thanks, Arjuna. And I think you bring up a good point about we can all say the right things, but the real change actually happens when the people who have reservations about it are comfortable enough to talk about it. That's when the real change actually happens. And one of the big pieces, I think, is self-awareness, and that doesn't come naturally. And organizations will have to do things to try and help raise that self-awareness. And it obviously starts with managers, because they influence their teams. Bingu, I think Standard Chartered does a really interesting aspect. I think you all call it the Diversity and Inclusion Council that you all have in the organization, which is, I think, about the employees themselves, not the leadership, but the other half of it, everybody else. Could you share a little bit more about how an council like that can be set up, how you've seen value from those councils towards the culture in the bank? Oh no, I think he got stuck. Okay. I'm going to just move on because I think he's gotten stuck. I'm going to leave that question for him because I think that's an important one I'd like to explore later. But in the meantime, till we get Bingu back, are there any specific success stories, Sarinda, Arjuna, you could share that might be helpful for people to understand the kind of equity you'll have created through certain policies or certain changes in how you do work in the company, and that has actually helped a specific person? I'm not interested in names, but just to be able to understand it from an individual perspective.
Sarinda, you don't mind me going first?
Arjuna, would you like?
Bani, sorry, I lost you. I'm back, but I can take the question later.
No, that's okay. You're back. So if you don't mind, we'll leave the success stories for 5 minutes. And if you can tell us a little bit about the D&I Council and how that was set up.
Hello. Yeah. Sorry about it, Bani. I think I lost my connection. Am I audible, Bani? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Bani, I think he missed the question.
Hello.
Oh, I think we're having a little bit of difficulty with Bingu and connectivity. Are you back?
Bani, is it audible? Can you hear me now? Yeah, I think
yes,
I'm back.
We can. Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Sorry about it. I'm audible, right? So, okay, fine. So, Bani, the D&I Council started some time ago. If I'm not missing, about 15 years ago, we started the D&I Council. But the D&I as a whole, now we have a global head as well, Maria. Dr. Maria. So we have a D&I champion in the country who runs the whole organization. Of course, it's a cross-functional collaboration where you have different pillars and different champions driving different pillars. So we have about 30 people voluntarily, they are participating in the council. So we have a head who is also doing, they have got another day job, but it's like some kind of a double hatting role. But the other volunteers who had come for the pillars, I mean, they are pretty much come as volunteers to drive those pillars. So if you look at the pillars, so first of all, we look at three areas, 3 C's, the clients, the colleagues, and the community. So the 3 areas we are driving. But internally, we clearly have 5 pillars. So gender, of course, is one of the main pillars that we have, the sexual orientation, the generation pillar, differently able pillar, as well as ethnicity pillars. So ethnicity pillar also we have broken it down to origin, nationality, and ethnicity. So those are the 5 pillars. So these champions, what they do is like, every year they come up with a plan to drive the agenda across the organization. Of course, there are global guidelines and global initiatives as well, but more than that, what I've seen is, because I've also worked in the multiple markets in Sri Lanka, I think we've done a pretty decent job in terms of driving these pillars. And specifically during the pandemic, this became much more important because people, when people started working from home, the engagement was a challenge. So D&I really helped us, driving the engagement as well during the pandemic. So if I look at the last 1.5 years, most of the D&I work was around driving some of these virtual events, be it Vesak, be it Aurudu, be it Ramadan, all of those events. But it's been going on for the last 10+ years now, close to 15 years, if I'm not mistaken. So it's part of the agenda. So it's BAU for us. But there's a lot of work for these individuals, the 5 individuals, and there are 30 people who are helping them. So I think it's important to have the global, central view and the support, and then at a country level, having at least one person taking ownership of it, and coming up with an agenda and get the buy-in of the management team. That's critical, and drive it across segments. So we are not stopped anything because of the pandemic. Actually, we've done more events and stuff during the pandemic through the D&I Council. It's been absolutely helpful to drive the agenda under the 5 pillars.
Thank you. And I think one thing I want to emphasize here is this is actually done by employees. It's not a functional thing. It's not HR or it's not a CEO. It is actually the employees coming together, which I think is the other aspect of it that becomes really important in D&I, so that it is not seen as a business imperative. It is employees coming up with ideas and suggestions.
Absolutely, Bani. One more thing I would like to highlight. So for the D&I Council, there are 2 management committee members who are coming as sponsors every year. So because you need the management support as well, right? When you do these events, you have to give goodies, the cost attached to it. And with health and safety these days, we did a club, quiz and things like that. So, getting all those approvals and support. So, I mean, getting the management buy-in is, I think, critical. But you're right, employees drive the agenda. It's very important that have D&I as a culture, not as a nice thing to have, or because you get some funding, you drive D&I, not like that. D&I as a culture, like, Sarinda clearly said, and also have some KPIs. Because I remember when we started this 15 years ago, we had our own challenges, right? It was not great. We had issues in the leadership level, we didn't have enough female colleagues in our leadership. So we had very clear KPIs, especially in the last 5 years. We said we want to do it and we will do it. And we came up with KPIs, including scorecards, etc. But not to, then, lean towards, okay, we have to somehow hire a female colleague and now we have to find somebody. We also did a lot of work in terms of grooming people. How do we make sure that our next level of leadership, the middle management, women leaders, how do we take up management committee jobs? So we've proven that, it's possible. And also we brought in some new leadership as well at a global level, not in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, we managed to find really good talent within the organization, take up leadership roles when some of the male colleagues left the organization. But globally, what we have also done is bringing some senior leaders from outside. Some companies might have to do that. I've heard things like some companies have KPIs, have women in leadership in like 5 years to be 30% or 50%. Sometimes you can't push it like that if you don't have the right skill set. Then you have to bring in people. You might have to bring in 1 or 2 people from outside. So that's another thing we've noticed at some of our markets, but not in Sri Lanka.
Thank you. If I may now go back to the question of would any success stories come to mind that you could maybe share in terms of how the additional support or equity or policy changes that you all have done and have actually seen results in terms of how individuals have progressed through the company? Do any success stories come to mind that any of you would like to share?
Yeah, Bani, many. So one thing is, one thing is at a hiring level, we also always have male, female, both colleagues. That it starts from the hiring level. So we have both genders in a panel when we interview people. So on the retention side, I think we've done a lot of good work by giving 100 days of maternity leave. And we also have a creche facility. We also have a buddy program when mothers come back. So our return ratio is like 100% in terms of after maternity. We see 100% return impact to work. If you get into specifics, so I just spoke to a colleague this morning. Actually, I asked her whether I can share the story. So she's now in the process. Actually, she just delivered her third baby, and she was about to resign from the organization at some point, I think last year. So one of the things, I mean, she wanted to leave and started a different career later, but because of working from home and, we automatically got into these new ways of working. Actually, she thought of continuing with the organization. We have many cases like that where people have pretty much, decided to stay in the organization while managing the family front. Not only mothers as well as the fathers, they have single parents as well on both genders, locally as well as globally. Many success stories where they have decided to move on because there's a support culture in the organization. So be it flexi, be it working from home. This is something that we started, like Sarinda said, about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, actually, we started working from home. People were not very supportive at that time, especially in markets like Sri Lanka. But we did it. We somehow did it for some colleagues, but flexi was always there. Flexi was always there as a standard offering. But we also had a couple of colleagues working from home in difficult times, personally, when they had to go through something. But now we just new ways of working. We're all working from home, and there are many stories around, employee retention as a result of the support culture we have.
Thank you. Sarinda, Arjuna, do you all have any stories you would like to share that would bring it to life a little bit?
Yeah, Bani, I don't know whether you can hear me well because there is a noise outside my room. If so, please let me know.
We can hear.
Yeah, I'm okay, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So I'm going to go to a very nice memory, about 6 years ago. As I was working for this organization, which is not very gender balanced, we had engagements with UAE, where it is very male dominant, especially on the tech side. So I had to choose between a male and a female for a foreign assignment. And when I looked at the context and the assignment, so we have been sending a lot of males, if at all, no females for foreign assignments. So that's the level of gender related issues we had in that company. So I wanted to break this and set a new trend, because we found that a lot of girls are joining the tech industry because they're quite good, at university level. We can find good, very talented girls who can join. The problem is they drop somewhere down the line and they don't take senior positions. So how do you show women that they can hold higher titles in the tech world, and how do we create a bit of brand ambassadors so other women can look up to her? So I had this moment, and I chose this girl to represent the team. There was a lot of resistance, by the way, so I want to tell that too. But when she went there, so when you choose your brand ambassador, you got to really pick your bright stars. But when she went there, eventually she did the work, and so it was our head office. They offered her a job. Why don't you join full time? Because we need you. And then later on, she converted herself into a medium-term assignment, and then she eventually migrated. But what you can see is, Bani, if you give them that comfortable working environment, despite having so much of difficulties, we want to start this as a system, they will find a way. I mean, you can find a few bright stars. You can give enough support for people to play their roles and shine. So I see this all the time in LSEG, because LSEG is a different organization. I remember I did a video with a girl. She's in the middle management. I mean, she was a brand ambassador. She went on the video. She went on some webinars. She told the entire world how to do D&I in the company and how she flourished in that system and how she can look forward to a bright career being a woman. So I go back to these points that are made by Sarinda and Bingu. It's all about converting that organization to a cultural element and making women feel that they're comfortable and supported by management. Whether you're a man or woman on top, they are supported. And when you get that confidence, the system finds a way and you can see people coming up. But despite having said all this, I prefer women to have more senior level leadership in Sri Lanka. Because I still see that, you know, somewhere down the line, people take alternate choices in career or their life. I would like that to be higher figures. I like to see more women in the boards, senior management, decision making, and make it a more vibrant working force. But then again, you know, those two examples show that we can really get this going in Sri Lanka, and it's at a point where we can really nurture this to a bigger success.
Thanks, Arjuna. Sarinda?
Bani, I'd like to add a little bit to what both gentlemen have said. And I think what's important is Bingu was talking about the importance of training and mentoring and things like that, and setting examples. That is something that we have been doing very aggressively at MAS. We have been spending a lot of time in training people about unconscious bias. That's a fairly interesting topic. There's no time for us to get into that right now, but that's a whole different.
That's a topic by itself.
By itself, absolutely. Unconscious bias and creating the awareness. That is the most important. Second, we have got a lot of programs of mentorship, coaching that we do for identified middle management female leaders. So what we try to do is help them navigate through their careers and make sure that their career paths are designed for them, and we try and develop them with them. So there's a lot of coaching. And then, of course, the infrastructure things that we do, like helping people work from home and or work from anywhere, flexible times, creches, all those things that we have with a lot of success. But there is one thing that we are all not talking about. There's a lot that organizations can do and are doing. So while we have the quota systems, while we have the training, the mentoring, all those things, the infrastructure development that's taking place, there is also a lot of work you have to do with families. And Arjuna, you were just touching on how people they seem to come to a certain point and then women tend to drop out of leadership roles. They come to middle management or somewhere upper middle, and then they drop out. And I feel this is again, this is unquantified and not something that we can prove. But there is still, in a culture like ours, a huge expectation for the woman to go home and play that role of mother, daughter, wife, daughter-in-law, whatever it may be. So as the responsibilities start becoming more and more, and time consumption becomes more in favor of, you have to spend a little more time on your work, that can get completely thrown off unless they have support from their home. And that's where we need to also, while counseling and while talking and training and creating the awareness among our own teams and our leadership teams and our employees, it's really important that we also include sometimes counseling and coaching and even some training and mentoring for the families of these leaders as they go along. Because a lot of people now, an interesting thing that has been thrown out by working from home is there are a lot of ladies in management and ladies in the organization who are finding it really difficult to balance working from home. Most of the men are loving it, but the women are hating it, because when they're at home, they're expected to be that mother, do the homework of the kids, and most kids are being homeschooled at the moment, do the homework of the kids, have dinner on the table, do all this stuff on a full-time basis, because they're at home on a full-time basis. So that is something that we've got to look out for as well. So it's not just the organizations only. There's a lot of education and a lot of awareness creation that has to be done with the families as well.
So Sarinda, you bring up a really good point. So I'm going to extend that a little bit further to say it's not just the families, it is the community that we have to start influencing. And with companies like you all, which all have CSR aspects, which are priority, if we are going to make the change that you all are all talking about, it's as much as within the company as well as talking about this outside the company. And raising this whole self-awareness, unconscious bias, because it's the culture comes from the community. It comes from, what we have had in generations. So, I'm familiar with all these three companies, and there is a lot of activity that you all do that is not limited to the company, but externally. And I think that's a really valid point to take note of if we really want to make change in Sri Lanka. If I may turn this the spotlight over to the three of you, and what I mean by that is, have you all been victims of exclusion due to this kind of advocacy that you all are, pushing right now? Because as much as us women in leadership can be a minority at times, allies are a minority also. Could you all share your stories or experiences where you all have been sort of excluded? Because why this to me is really important is leaders who are listening always have that hesitation of, how much of biting the bullet, how much of getting pushed out of the boys' club are things that they have to be worried about. Any experience that you all would like to share? I'm going to start with Sarinda.
Everybody went dead quiet. Sorry, Bani, I had a slight connection hiccup there. Can you just quickly run me through that again?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, when you are an advocate for gender parity, things like that, which is going against the norm, have you been a victim of exclusion? In terms of, have you been cast aside or made life difficult because you are, breaking the norm as men?
Actually, no, I must say that in my personal experience, absolutely not. And I won't go to expand on that further.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But absolutely not.
Bingu, Arjuna, any aspects that you all have had, or it's been easy enough to do the changes?
No, Bani. Absolutely not. In the culture that we drive, there's no way of victimizing anybody who's supporting an agenda of diversity. You get fired. There'll be a speak up, and that's the end of it. So we have very clear policies around if somebody is messing around with your decision making when it comes to driving diversity. There are very clear-cut processes for people to escalate. So we come far because of those policies, I believe. So I've not experienced across the markers that I've worked with. No.
Great.
Bani, I would like to push this question a little to the audience, because we have to answer it from their context. I think we are in organizations where this is well supported and there is sponsorship from the board. But a lot of this, there may be listeners who want to do it ground up, and they want to get that framework going. So did it have an impact on me? Not at LSEG, definitely not. But if you're working for a very male-oriented organization or a culture, there are certain countries in the world where you get exposed to such situations. And there are certain companies in Sri Lanka where there is male orientation. And when you want to break this through and start a new trend, getting that inner circle working for you and getting that larger benefit convinced is a great step ahead of your resistance that you're trying to weather. The second thing is being a leader. If you're playing your leadership role right, and if you get it through a consultative process, nobody's going to derail you. Whether there's a system in the company or not, you will have enough feedback and consultation going as a process where people will eventually support you in this process. But one advice I would give is, you see, we are not trying to create a competition between men and women here. both men and women can easily coexist in organization. We are trying to get women. You see, we have a fantastic literate community in Sri Lanka, and women can work and add value to an economy, and they can have a greater career as a part of their life and balance most of these personal commitments. So we are trying to support that as a greater cause and give that visibility, so it becomes a better system for us to live. So in that, when we execute, communicate, and position ourselves in doing this journey, I would advise creating no friction in an organization where it runs into politics and resistance between men and women. You should never have it, and men should feel that, you know, by having women in their teams and in their management, it actually supports them in their decision making. It gives that vibrant, happy culture where you can see a lot of diversity. It needs to be nurtured that way. Then it gives you overall long-term results.
Thank you. So I obviously have
Arjuna, only thing that I would like to add to that, Bani, just one point. I mean, if the leadership is not supportive, it's extremely difficult for colleagues. So I think it starts from the top. So I think it's critical that as a leadership, they acknowledge that there's a problem, and then we come up with a plan and, you know, have a short-term, medium, and long-term goals to achieve those. Because if the leadership is not supporting that kind of culture, it will be very difficult for the junior employees to, you know, fight. You can be a fighter, but it takes a long time.
Agreed. So I do have more questions, but I think we're running out of time, and I'm going to hand over to Linda to see whether there are any questions from the audience.
Yes, Bani, we have a few questions. The first one is from Shihan. A common mistake companies make is saying they value diversity and have written policies, but in terms of execution, it doesn't reflect that in action. The question is, are KPIs and quota that we discussed earlier the only way forward?
Bani, if I may take that on, I think we already answered that question in talking about the training that is done, the awareness that is created, and all those things. So it's not just a case of setting a KPI and saying you have to go and achieve it. It is trying from all levels to change that, creating not only the awareness of how our behavior has to change, but also providing the female employees with the tools and the capability of being able to fill in to those roles and navigate their way through. That's where I was talking about mentoring, coaching, and all those things that are being done on a regular basis. So I think that I saw that question. There's a more interesting question that comes up next.
Yes. Okay. Indeed, Shihan also asked, how would you advocate for diversity to colleagues who don't understand the importance?
You see, Linda,
so for that, I think there's enough research done by, yeah, Arjun, you want to take it? Go for it.
No, go ahead, Bingo, go ahead. Yeah, I'll add on later.
No, but I'm trying to say is that there's enough research done on this by BCG, McKinsey, and PwC. If somebody is interested, a lot of those things are in the public domain. You can read about us, Standard Chartered Bank, to see how the performance have gone up since we came up with this core purpose and diversity as a large part of the core purpose. There are many examples for you to learn. If the person is part of the corporate world, there are many examples in Sri Lanka as well as overseas. So, yeah.
Yeah, what I wanted to say is, you see, you're going to have people who do not understand this, and because of that, you will resist it. There'll be people who will resist it because they are scared of losing their position eventually. As these are bitter truth factors that we need to discuss openly. But at the end, what do you want to do as a leader is what it boils down to in an organization. So if you are in a position where you can set it up, as Bingu said, these are the top management support that we are talking about here. So if you are in a position to create that top management support, your job is to create that and set up a system, ensure that in interviews there is enough women participation, there is a progressive system where people get promoted, there is a very fair way of assessing people. So you can set up that environment irrespective of whether people do not like it or not, because as a leader, you are not actually doing things to get popular. You're trying to do things so that there is an organization that is going to last for another 10, 15, 100 years. So you need to do those things. But second thing is, there is it could be that, you know, what I just mentioned, you need to go back, learn and unlearn that, and look at life in a different way. So it needs awareness. You need to send people to larger audiences where this has happened, the transition has happened, they see the benefits, they see the coexistence as a competitive advantage. So it's a journey. Okay, what I encourage you to do is start it somewhere. You don't need to capture all 100 marks at once. You know, have some milestones which are easily achievable, and then progressively, you know, take this journey. If you look at between Sarinda, Bingu and me, our 3 organizations are in different states. So similarly, if you start somewhere, you can get somewhere.
If I may just add one thing there, Linda, I think a lot of empathy, self-awareness are aspects that companies do need to bring in if this is going to be a real change and a real culture change in companies. Because I think a lot of resistance comes from the lack of knowing it, and ignorance will kind of scare people. So making it, bringing it down to the basics of knowing what empathy is, why is empathy important, learning about other people, not just what you know, that aspect becomes really important as little things companies need to do to change how people think. And, you know, leadership, all of those are big things, but I'm talking about, you know, you have to bring humanity back if you are going to change culture, and that comes from more awareness, which I think everybody spoke of.
Thank you. There is another question, which I will partly answer and see if somebody else would still want to add something on that. Are we only talking about gender diversity? Diversity includes race, color, gender, sexual orientation, and religion. Absolutely. The Council for Business with Britain Diversity and Inclusion Work Group has decided to have the first 2 webinars on the aspect of gender diversity, because all topics are so big, we could probably talk about it for 10 hours. Nevertheless, this is a webinar series, and we are currently preparing the balance of the series, which will likely have some of the other diversity and inclusion topics. Farzana, I hope you will be joining us then to discuss those points too. All right. Well, thank you very much, Bani. Do you have any last questions yourself?
Is it me?
Yeah. Any last questions? Any last points you wanted to address?
So yes, I think just to conclude, if I may summarize a little bit, I think what all 3 speakers today were talking about is very much going down to the mindset change of a culture, of a company, of an individual, if we are going to go down this journey of inclusion. Why is it important? It might be a nice thing to have, but if you really do look at the research, it is the way companies can be successful in the future, because the reality is you need to get the best talent, and in order to get the best talent, you do need your employees to feel like they belong, they feel so that they feel like they can give their best and stretch themselves. In this world of disruption that we are living in at the moment, you can't quite manage with mediocre. You do need to get the best out of everybody, best potential. And that is kind of where this whole world of diversity inclusion, the topic of diversity and inclusion is going in. So I'm hoping that what you have heard today has helped you understand it a little bit better. Maybe some policies, some first steps that you all can take in your companies. And hope to see you all in the next events, which we will continue on, because mindset change is not a one-time thing. It takes a while, it takes effort, it takes intention, it takes purpose. So thank you so much, Sarinda, Arjuna, and Bingu, for your time today. Over to you, Linda.
Pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank you
Bani.
very much. We have come to the end of this second webinar in the series that will run this year. So on behalf of the Council for Business with Britain, thank you, Arjuna, Bingu, and Sarinda for your valuable insight, and Bani for the thoughtful moderation. Thank you to all listeners as well. We hope you've enjoyed this session. Our next webinar is currently planned for September. Keep an eye on our Council for Business with Britain social media to get registered. I'll leave a final word to CBB President Roshani Moraes. Roshani.
Thank you, Linda. That was an excellent webinar and a follow through to the one we had with Lord Davis 2 weeks ago. So all that is left for me is to say thank you to everyone who was involved. A big thank you to London Stock Exchange coming forward as a sponsor. Thank you, Arjuna and the team, for that. And thank you to, again, Arjuna, Bingu, and Sarinda for coming forward, giving us of your time and talking about your experience here and sharing with the wider audience. Because we did talk about what the role of the leadership with Lord Davis, and we talked about his experience globally, the pitfalls, the mistakes he made. And I know the audience, and we were keen to hear it from 3 of our local leaders, 3 leading corporates in 3 different industries, and 3 well-known, well-respected leaders. We couldn't have had a better panel than the 3 of you. So thank you once again for coming forward and helping us with that. And Bani, for so skillfully moderating this and extracting all that information from the 3 men. So thank you very much, Bani, once again, for doing this for the second time. My thanks to the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce for handling the administrative work, and also the CBB committee for coming forward again and helping us. And also the CBB subcommittee that worked on this area. And as Linda said, this is a series of 5 webinars. And somebody did ask me why we are saying diversity and inclusion if we are only going to talk about gender parity. And I said, this is a bigger project, and we are going to evolve into talking of diversity later on in all aspects. But of course, we start with gender. We are a little biased there, right? So we start with gender, and that's how we started off. So my thanks again to Linda for all her efforts together with the committee to put these programs together, and to Asanti Fernando from the British High Commission, Tanuja Jayawardena from MAS, Manori Gunaratna from Finlays, Arjuna himself for giving of your time, Arjuna, even on the subcommittee, and volunteering your staff and colleagues to help us out, and Gayantika Patiranahe from Finlays. So thank you very much once again, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. See you soon in a few weeks with the rest of the webinars. Thanks once again.